Hey everybody, Jim Kirk here. If you win, do I have to lose? It seems that far too many leaders have adopted this mindset, and it's really a question that I've got, and I can't wait to explore it with my guest today, Simon Haigh. Simon's a life coach, consultant, speaker, business advisor. He's even an attorney. He helps leaders unlock their potential and create transformational change. And certainly, Simon's the right guy for me to tackle this question with. Welcome, Simon.
Jim, it's great to be here. It's a great honor from Ireland over here in Europe. And it's a great question as well, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah, no, I can't wait. In fact, let's just get right into it, Simon. If you win, do I have to lose?
Well, it depends on your perspective of business. So, traditionally, that was very much the perspective of business. It was kill what you eat, and it depended on who you spoke to. But, from my perspective, and I often say this, we went to bed in 2019 and we've woken up in 2030. The world has changed, right? It's changed. And of course, we need to, we need, business is business, right? It needs to satisfy shareholders. But I would turn that question on the head and say, what do businesses truly need to do to grow, right? Let's not be distracted by the competition. Let's think about growth, right? Because if you're distracted by competition and other factors, are you really focusing on growth? And for me, yes, traditionally, the goal of creating a good deal for both parties was, the traditional legal way of doing it, and it was about bringing the right mindset and the ability to negotiate and try and get what you can out of a deal. But when you think about it, I mean, the perspective of a business nowadays, the brand identity of a business includes all sorts of things, right, that feed into your growth journey. And so if you think you can get away with constantly winning and expecting others to lose, be very careful about that, because when people look at your brand identity, that yes, they're looking at your logo, yes, they're looking at your vision and mission, but as importantly, in fact more importantly, they're looking at qualitative factors like what's the behavior of the people in the business, right? What's the language that's being used? What's the culture within the business? How do we communicate out into the world? And how do other people see us? And I keep talking, Jim, about this thing called 21st century leadership. I do a lot of work around inclusive, aligned, cohesive business. And for me, it starts from the top. So the biggest challenge for business is to create growth. To create growth, you need to differentiate. To differentiate, you need to innovate. To innovate, you need diversity of thought and diversity of cultures and diversity of behaviors. To activate diversity, you need inclusion. And to manage all this, you need inclusive leadership. And inclusive leadership isn't just about win and lose. I think it's about win-win, or it's about expanding the pie.
I'm with you, and believe me, you're answering every question I've prepared. So,
Good.
and Simon, I knew we would do this because I just, I'm so familiar with your work, and I just think it's wonderful how you're always helping people understand the bigger picture. But let me suggest this. I mean, and you've said it in there. Somewhere you use the term mindset. It's a mindset thing, right? I mean, I believe like abundance is the opposite of what we're talking about, the opposite of scarcity, right?
Yeah.
So abundance, there's enough to go around. There's enough for everyone. And if you come with the scarcity mindset, I think resources are limited and someone gets them first. That means I get left out in the cold. So there's this whole like dynamic that I think definitely prevails out there in the leader's mindset. So let me try to shape this into a question. Let's dive into the characteristics of those two very different mindsets. What are some of the key characteristics of abundance versus scarcity?
Well, I'll start with abundance, and I often talk about the work of Dave Ulrich, the father of modern HR, and he would say that the aim of a good leader, a business leader, is to make others look good, right? Don't make yourself look good, make others look good. So some of the things I would be talking about would be how do we go about harnessing uncertainty? We're constantly living in uncertainty. Like there's no such thing as a certain day. So, put in place systems to harness that sort of stuff. Also, how do we create psychological safety within our teams and also with our customers? How do we empower our business and our customers to build their brand, right?
Hmm.
How do we personalize employee experiences? How do we create the right culture? How do we provide guidance around decision making? So all of these things. And I think that abundance mindset requires courage. It requires courage. It requires awareness. I think, the old form of, the opposite of that was all really about, it was always about return on investment, right? It was about return on investment, and it was all about metrics, and it was about the quantitative stuff. The funny thing is, though, Jim, that I do a lot of work. I represent the world's leading brand valuation consultancy, brand finance, and 70% of what makes up a corporate brand is not the quantitative stuff. It's the qualitative stuff. So it's people's perception of the business.
Yeah.
It's how we communicate. It's all the things we've mentioned. And so I think, yes, that traditional world of constant return on investment still exists, but I think we need to move to this new world of return on more relationships. And I think the main reason why, and this has come up in a couple of conversations this week, the main reason why leaders, not all leaders, are moving to this abundance mindset, I have to say, is because they're so busy, right? It's not because they don't believe it. It's not because they don't see the benefits. It's they're so busy that they don't have time to stand up and just look over and sniff the air and realize the opportunities that are over the horizon. So
Yeah. I mean,
there's an awful lot of stuff going on.
right on, and I think, to put it simply, scarcity is about feeling overwhelmed, feeling depressed, feeling
Absolutely.
paralyzed, right? Because you're paranoid. You're like, oh, well, what do I have to win next,
Yeah. Yeah.
versus an abundance mindset where it leaves you kind of feeling excited and motivated and ready for action because you realize like there is enough to go around.
Yeah.
And how exciting is this? And
Yeah.
hey, if Simon and Jim can connect, we might be able to, knock the ball out of the park together, where maybe
Absolutely.
either one of us maybe wouldn't be able to, but when we combine forces, we both win, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I see that in my personal work. It's funny, a few years ago, people would say to me, Simon, why do you collaborate so much? Why do you
Mm,
partner so much? Why don't you keep it all for yourself? There's a couple of reasons for that. There's three. The first one is it's much more fun because
yeah.
we learn from others. We're constantly learning, right? The second thing is I wrote an article about maybe 10 years ago called Collaborate to Innovate. We can't actually innovate by ourselves. We
Right.
think we can, right? And also, I guess the third thing is we all need to grow as leaders. And and we need to be aligned to grow. We need to align who we are with what we do with what we're trying to sell, right? Because
Mhm.
otherwise the world won't believe in it. Can you really, Jim? I'll ask you a question. Can you really align yourself? Can you really understand yourself in isolation of others? I don't think you can.
No, no, absolutely right. And I kind of parlay what you're saying into the whole notion of culture, which you've mentioned a couple of times already in the conversation. It's one I want to explore with you. I think a lot of my brand's connected to culture transformation. So it's something that I care very dearly about. And I'm interested in your opinion. But here's the question. Since company culture is sort of a game of follow the leader, a leader's mindset sets the tone for the culture, right?
Yeah.
So, what are some of the things that we might find in a culture that suggests the leaders are looking through it through a scarcity prism?
I was expecting what you were going to ask around abundance, but okay, let me just flip it on the head. So,
Yeah.
I think the scarcity prism is about silos. It's about not recognizing the quietest person in the room. It's
Hmm.
about not fully allowing the sustainability of trust, right?
Hmm.
It's about not really doing the work to ensure cohesion and alignment and inclusion in the business. And I guess most importantly, I'm just thinking this off
Yeah.
through
Yeah.
observations. It's about a scarcity mindset. A scarcity leadership mindset is about not paying attention. It's not paying attention to what's happening in the business. It's not encouraging participation. It's not building trust. It's not noticing the quietest, who often is the smartest person. So I think and that's all driven by fear and ego, right? That,
Yes.
as you said, it drives. And so that's the opposite of the abundant inclusive decision-making mindset, which is relationship building, recognition, empathy, building trust, encouraging participation, and encouraging alignment. That requires leadership courage.
No, I love it. I love it. And I'm with you. I think it certainly connotes a lack of trust. So if we're working from a scarcity mindset, it means I don't trust anybody. It's take no prisoners. It's, I'm looking for that opportunity to say I told you so, if you
Yeah,
make the wrong decision. And when I see my clients operate with this, and a lot of them do, I mean, it's a very common mindset. And that's why I kind of want to spend a little bit more time talking about the scarcity side of it, because I think our audience is probably going to be able to to really feel what we're talking about if we tackle this from that angle. But when I see clients operate this way, I'll counsel them and I'll say, look, the competition isn't inside these four walls. The competition is outside these four walls.
yeah,
Why are
yeah,
we fighting with each other? Why are we competing and trying to win all the time?
yeah.
So, what do you think of the notion that scarcity incentivizes uh, us to sort of withhold information, to give ourselves an edge over whoever it is we think we're competing with?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the traditional way of looking at business. And, put it, I'll flip it on its head, right? So, right now, there's a real problem with how do the younger generations feel empowered and mentored living in this blended hybrid working world, right? So, there are real challenges around that. And there needs to be the opposite of scarcity mindset, right? We need to find ways of encouraging communication, of encouraging. And it's interesting, this is the first time in history you have 5 generations in the workplace. Okay.
Mm,
And so
mm,
you're going to have to find a way of moving away from that scarcity mindset. Otherwise, you're going to have all sorts of lack of productivity, and then you're going to have problems around employer branding, because the word's going to get round, right? The second interesting thing to mention is this whole area of knowledge management. And
mm,
this really feeds into scarcity mindset. So, and I used to work in this space in Australia. In the West, and you think about some of the traditional American companies like GE and Boeing, where most 85% of the knowledge in organizations in the West is tacit knowledge, invariably in their minds of gray-haired men like you and I, right? And when we retire, it's gone, right? It's gone.
yes. Yeah.
Whereas ironically, in the East, in China, now I'm not saying we're going to change our systems and
Mhm,
processes and protocols to be like China, but it's the opposite. 80 to 90% of their knowledge is explicit. It's written down, it's owned by the company. So when the senior executives go, it stays in the company. So I
mm.
guess my question back to you is which feeds more into scarcity mindset? Is it the traditional Western way of managing knowledge, which is non-explicit, or is it the Eastern way? Which one do you think?
Well, I think it's definitely the fact that we in the West get taught from a very early age that it's all about winning. So if you grow up in that sort of way where you're in competition from the time you can walk, you know, and parents are encouraging it, in fact, whether they're doing it with kids' sports or they're doing it at school. You've got to get all A's and you got to make the honor society and you've got to get a scholarship and all this stuff. It's all about
Yeah,
winning. It's all about beating others who are part of your group, part of your peer group, right? And, back to the first question about withholding information, it seems to me it's all about parochial interest, right? If I can hoard information,
yeah,
then I can achieve my agenda of quote unquote winning, even at the cost of the business. And I mean, how many times have you seen that with a client, right?
yeah,
Where the leadership is constantly clawing at each other, trying to get a little bit more in their budget, a little bit more of their project supported, and so on, at the cost of actually defeating the competition outside of the four walls,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Um,
It's
it comes at a high
interesting.
cost.
It does, and I think it's interesting because I've been talking to an academic in Croatia recently, and she's created a center of authentic leadership, and she talks about when we're children, we're authentic. When we're children, we ask for what we want and we show our emotions. But unfortunately, I'm talking about the West here, and I think
Mm,
this feeds into all aspects of the Western
sure.
civilization.
Yep.
But unfortunately, in our teens, 20s, 30s, and 40s, we move from a world of authenticity into a world of expectation. In other words, we're fearful, right? We
Yes.
think, oh my God, I'm going to lose this job, or I'm not going to make my returns. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. That's what seems to predominantly feed business and leadership in the West historically. And then when we get to around the age of 50, it seems to be around there, for whatever reason, either we've lost our role, or we've had a crisis, or we've realized our humanity, right? We
Hmm.
start going back to that authentic self. We,
Hmm.
we, we, we hanker for that as well. And I guess my question is, and I'm fascinated by this, what can organizations do to maintain that authenticity all the way through? Because it works when you're a kid and it works when you're older. So
Yeah.
what do we need to do to change that
Well,
mindset in the
I,
middle?
I love the question, and it's so appropriate. I feel like, again, so much of Western business is based on a scarcity mindset. The abundance mindset is kind of a newer idea. Now, again, it's been talked about for 20 years, but it's still one of those things that we haven't fully embraced yet, because we can't get it out of our DNA that I have to win all the time, right? And I think it's like a lifeboat mentality is the thing that leaders have to flush out of their organizations. They've got to identify this and say, look, you can't give the idea of teamwork lip service, right? Because
Yeah,
when you do, I know what you're doing. It's sort of like the TV game show Survivor, like I'm going to play along and we're partners and everybody's, nice, nice, until I get the opportunity to vote you off the island. you know,
exactly.
and when that's going on inside a company, guess what you're doing? You're worrying about what's going on inside of the company. You're not worrying about your customer. You're not worrying
Yeah,
about what the competition is doing. You're kind of
yeah,
inwardly focused. And as a consequence, your business suffers. So I think it's on a leader's shoulders to
yeah.
identify this and to start to unwind a lot of that stuff that's causing it.
I agree. And, we mentioned Marshall Goldsmith before. He talks about the leaders of tomorrow's leaders. And there's a precursor to what he says, but he says at the end, tomorrow's leaders, and we are tomorrow's leaders today,
Yep.
should rely more on collaborators and be facilitators rather than experts. In other words, let's put our ego aside a little bit. Let's be a little bit less arrogant, and let's be a little bit more open-minded and willing and honest about some
Mm.
other ways of looking at things. And so I've come up, I talk about the 6 C's of 21st century leadership. And the first one is cognizance, right? Ensure that we all have biases, but ensure your personal biases don't always influence your thinking, right? Sometimes you've got to dislocate your own biases, right? Second thing is curiosity. Engage in respectful questioning to better understand others. As we said before we started recording, we don't innovate in isolation. We can't feel
Right.
self-aligned in isolation. And so we need to work with others. The number 3 is cultural intelligence. Seek opportunities to work with
Mm.
different cultures. Number 4, collaboration. Assemble teams that are diverse in thinking and focus on respect. Number 5, commitment. Treat diversity, inclusion, and open-mindedness as a business priority. And probably most importantly, number 6 is courage. Seek the
Yes.
contribution of others to
Mm.
overcome your own personal limitations.
Yep.
At the end of the day, Jim, we're all human, right? Doesn't matter
Hmm.
how high and mighty your role is, doesn't matter how much money you're getting paid as a C-suite, you're still a human being. And so
Hmm.
don't blindside yourself by your own ego. That's
Hmm.
really important. And it's easier said than done, though, when we need to pay the bills and pay the mortgage. But increasingly, the evidence is suggesting that this new way of leadership, A, gets you more followers and allows you to be more sustainable as a leader.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, if you think about the personal toll that a scarcity mindset has on the
Yeah,
individual, right? I mean, it holds you back from being accountable and being able to admit you're wrong.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and the 6 C's, I think, talk to that. 4 out of 6 of those are about really taking personal, responsibility, accountability, and trying to drive that into the organizations that we're leading, right?
Yeah, and the other thing is, I often talk about, resilient leadership. Leadership provides a bridge to the future, right? That's the whole point of being a leader. Yes, you've got to manage the business today, but you have got to magically provide a bridge to the future. And when you think about it, everything is about communication. Everything we learn, remember, speak, hear is about communication. And so if you're a scarcity minded leader and you are not you're withholding, a lot of information if you're or from your stakeholders or staff, or if you're not fully telling the truth, or you're not fully telling the whole story. And of course, as far as corporately possible, you're not going to tell your staff everything. But if you're withholding stuff that people are whispering about anything anyway, right? Or
Yeah.
if you're, in the words of Michael Dell, I used to work for Dell, he said, "Don't perfume the pig," right? Don't pretend bad news is good news. Because
Right.
if you're going to do that, guaranteed a vacuum is going to form and anxiety will result. People are smarter than you as the leader when that happens. And
Yes.
that's what happens. And there's a lot of arrogance and ignorance underpinning that. And you see it with politicians, particularly right
Sure.
now around the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
But that, again, it takes courage and it takes awareness.
No, I know, and I love the fact that that's one of your six, and it really is a critical one, because I think the easy way out is scarcity. The harder way out is abundance, right?
Yeah,
And you know, again, I don't want to dwell on this, but I feel like we've got to amplify it a little bit. The personal toll that it takes when people are operating from that scarcity mindset. I mean, it kills any kind of chance of any deep and intimate relationship, right?
yeah,
It takes a lot of energy to communicate with somebody who's operating from a scarcity mindset.
yeah.
You know you're going to go into a debate with somebody if they're operating from scarcity. So you can't
Exactly.
offer you can't offer an opinion. You can't offer feedback because it's going to create this big argument. So what do you end up doing? You end up not
Absolutely.
talking, you end up not communicating, and as a consequence, your business suffers.
And as a result, you end up ironically eventually running out of deals because, and I've written
Yes.
about this in a couple of my books, and there are four main reasons, right? I'm getting back to the more legal transactional side of the question around win or lose. There are
Mm,
four main reasons why people aren't as good at closing deals as they think. And they're all about really ego driven or fear driven. The first one is egocentrism. So most human beings view experiences in a way that flatter them, right? So we tend to think better of ourselves than often we are, right? The second thing then is confirmation bias. We tend to see
mm,
what we want to see to confirm
yes.
what we believe, right? The third thing is satisficing. We tend to settle for something less than we could otherwise have settled for, but that's normally as a result of not feeling as though we are fully connecting with others, right? Which again is ego and fear. And the fourth one then is, and I hate to say it, it's called self-reinforcing incompetence. Most people are unaware of their incompetence.
Hold on. You're gonna have to explain that one. I love it. But tell
Yeah.
us more, Simon. Tell us more.
Well, self-reinforcing incompetence. Most people are unaware of. Really, incompetence is a strong word, but if you look at a lot of these surveys and tests, and you see stuff on television, right? Even things like MasterChef, right? And they'll say to a chef, "What do you score yourself?" 9 times out of 10, that when you're asked the question, you'll score yourself higher than somebody else will score you, right? And
Mm,
that's a general human trait because we are the only ones backing ourselves. At the end of the day, Jim, nobody on this planet is going to save any of us, right? And so, of course, we're biased towards ourselves. But I think that's another reason why we need to be very careful about that because it blindsides us.
sure.
And so that's what I mean by that. And those four reasons why people are ineffective deal closers are quite easily overturned by opening your mind, being a little bit less egotistical, be a little bit more abundance mindset thinking. Now that takes courage, and also you got to think longer term, right? When you go from
Yes.
scarcity to abundance, don't expect the abundance to happen quickly.
Right. Right.
There's a difference between potential and opportunity, and that's a journey. It's not a quick result.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so let's get to this, and we're winding down. We've got about 5 minutes or so left. I want to ask a couple more questions, but the first one is, what advice do you give a leader who you see is overwhelmingly in this need to have to win everything all the time?
Well, a lot of what we've just discussed, I would recommend they listen to this kind of conversation. Right? I'd also, point them to numbers as well. Data speaks, right? So if you look at, a lot of the work of say brand finance, they've gone into organizations, they've looked at leaders, and they've seen that those leaders who are more authentic, those organizations that are more authentic, there is a direct correlation between authentic leadership and brand value,
Mm,
employer branding, and also stock market return, right?
mm,
And when you think
mhm.
about it, I always talk about the 3 R's of business success. There's revenue at the top, there's risk, and there's reputation. Okay.
Hmm.
So if you are constantly chasing revenue through ego and fear and scarcity mindset, the chances are eventually you're going to take your eye off of revenue, reputation, or risk. Okay.
Yes.
So that's the first thing to say. The
So you're
second thing
ready
is
to cut corners to win.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, and we've seen it so many times. And the hardest thing for a leader to do is to balance that triangle. Revenue, risk, reputation. But if you have the tools, if you have some of the things that we've mentioned, and also if you've, I think we started. You started by asking about mindset. A lot of the work that I do is work with my clients on what I call their frequency, right? So I start
Mm.
with looking at what is your mindset, your why, your levels of positivity, how inclusive thinking are you, right? Then
Mhm.
I go into your leadership growth capabilities. So once you've looked at the mindset growth capabilities, how do you communication? What's your level of awareness? How do you influence others? Then I look at your business growth capabilities. What's your intuition? How do you empower others? How
Mm.
resilient are you? And only then do we look at your brand. How do you resonate out into the world? And so it's a journey of frequency to understand your identity, and how you impact others. That's a process, and it doesn't happen overnight. But I'm
Mhm.
telling you, some of the clients that I work with say, "Wow, this is a flipping mindset. I'm going from that scarcity mindset to one of, if I intertwine my true identity with my brand and allow its honest frequency to develop, a following will come." But
Mhm.
again, it takes time. It takes
Yes.
time.
Yeah. The simple thing that I do with the folks that I'm coaching a lot of times when I see that they're all about um, having to win is I often say, is it worth it? What's your ultimate goal here? Are you going to just leave devastation in your wake as you win?
Yeah,
Or are,
yeah,
are you going to try to be the type of leader that pulls people along, that includes people in the conversation, that helps them own part of the
yeah,
vision and that kind of stuff? And,
yeah,
can you help them see how they can be successful, helping the organization be successful?
yeah, yeah,
That takes patience. It takes thought. It has to be deliberate. It's not
yeah.
something that you just wake up and do. I think it's something that you've got to really say, I'm going to do this.
Yeah, and also you need to demonstrate the data that this is not just a good thing, a virtuous thing, but this is actually really good for business. So it's good for
Yes.
employer
Yeah.
branding, it's good for brand value, it's also good for productivity and potentially profitability. But it's up to you to believe it. And so there's all sorts of data from brand finance, from McKinsey's, from Deloitte's in Australia did a huge survey recently that shows that by 2030, 63% of companies will be soft skill heavy, which is around empathy and communication skills.
Mm.
You can choose to believe it, or you can be passed by on the faster lane in the freeway.
Yeah, the travel lane.
Yeah,
Um, Last question. So we've talked a lot about the scarcity mindset and mentality. We talked a lot about how it influences the culture of the organization, how the business is run. Um, what are some of the things we can do to help somebody who's got that thing with it? Their self-talk is saying that, I never get what I want. Someone else always wins. I can't do it. Those are all scarcity mindset examples. How do we help folks sort of flip the script in their minds?
I think it's important to talk them through some good examples of leaders who have taken time out and either have pivoted or demonstrate an abundance mindset. And I often talk about, for me, there's plenty of others, but there are four key traits of effective leaders. And then I demonstrate what you need to do to try and attain some sort of skill set in these four key traits. And the first one is calmness, right? If
Mm.
you're not calm in a crisis, if you're not calm in terms of your growth journey, if you're not patient, then don't expect others to believe in you. And so don't expect your leadership to be sustainable. The second one then is the ability to listen, right? To
Mm.
truly
Mm.
listen, right?
Mhm.
And so, if you're not going to truly listen to everything that's out there, to all everything that's coming back to you, don't expect to take the leap from scarcity to abundance mindset. The third thing is the importance of being measured. And I mean, being
Mm.
measured in two ways. You need to be measured in the way you communicate, but also don't be afraid of being measured. Don't afraid of feedback. Don't be afraid of looking at your strengths. I often talk to my clients about looking at various different types of surveys to look at their strengths. Because if you don't know your strengths, how on earth are you going to be able
Yes.
to
Yeah.
calibrate your journey? And then the fourth thing then is you do need to be resilient, right? I mean,
Yes.
life is like taking a dog for a walk. When you see a dog and it suddenly sniffs a lamppost, it pulls that leash, and you don't know where you are next. That's life, right? So I think calmness, ability to listen, importance of being measured, and resilience, they're the sort of things I focus on with clients to
Sure.
help prove that this journey is a journey from scarcity to abundance.
Yes, I'm with you 100%. For me, as I counsel some of the folks that I'm coaching, I kind of help them get there to recast their self-talk, and I've done a bunch of episodes on it and written a couple articles about it and so on. I think it all starts there. It's between your ears, you know. And it is. I mean, it's about nurturing your strengths, which you mentioned. It's about accepting your weaknesses, which is absolutely critical. And then finally, you've got to believe that you're good enough, that who you are is all that's necessary to be able to get from point A to point B. Then you don't
Yeah.
have to win all the time. Then you can
Yeah.
recast from scarcity to abundance.
Yeah, absolutely. It's accepting who you are. It's self-acceptance. It's self-awareness, and it's also not being afraid. The essence of growth mindset is pushing yourself. It's accepting that you're never going to be always number one, but as
Yes.
long as you're always trying your best, right? And I think it was Einstein who said, if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. I don't know whether he said that, but I think he did. And it's true. It's true. If you don't
Yes.
if
I
you
love
don't
it.
change, if you don't change, you're
Right.
always going backwards.
Yep. Hey, look, Simon, it was so great to have you here today on the
My pleasure.
Indispensable Conversation. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much. Really insightful. We can carry on the conversation back on LinkedIn Live. And for now, until next time, thanks, Simon.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.